Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we wanted to discuss the main differences between QNAP's QTS 5 platform and QuTS. You may have purchased a QNAP recently, or you've got an older generation QNAP that has now been given the offer of upgrading to the ZFS built QUTS platform, and you're curious about what it's going to give with one hand and what it's going to take away with the other. Because, you know, let's not make any bones about this. There are a few very fundamental differences between QTS 5 and QUTS 5 that actually can, dictate you as the end user which one's going to give you the best QNAP NAS experience. And as we're seeing more and more QNAP NASs arriving within that £1,000 to £2,000 bracket from the brand that arrive with an option at the beginning when you set it up to choose between QTS 5 and QUTS 5, picking between EXT4 and ZFS, a lot of you want to know that you're making the right choice at the beginning. A number of you, and this video was genuinely inspired by just a single comment over on YouTube, I believe between the Christmas New Year break, where someone asked me about whether they should make the jump to QTS 5 on their 72XT series because they then had the option, and they didn't know that if you change from one file system version of QTS to the other, it will format your system. The QNAP will warn you, but it will warn you as you're about to initiate it there. So a lot of you are pondering this and not realizing just how big a step it's going to be. So that's what today's video is about. We've got two NASs running here on screen. On the left hand side of the screen here, I have the TS464 from QNAP, and that is running QTS 5.0.1.2, and on the right hand side of the screen, my right, we are running the brand new TVS H874, and again, this is a system that arrives with the option of the ZFS QUTS platform in 5.0.1.22, or you can opt for that one. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers straight off the bat. Again, fast forward 2 or 3 minutes if you just want to get to the nitty gritty, but I think it's important that we have a bit of context. First and foremost, not all NASs can support the ZFS software. You may be watching this thinking, cool, I own a 464, I want the... You can't. The only reason we're using the 464 here is because it was a NAS I've got set up here that's got QTS on it, set up to a reasonable degree for this comparison. You're going to have a NAS that is running reasonable hardware, at least 8 gig of memory and 16 gig to take advantage of all the facilities if you want to run QUTS. If you want to know whether your NAS is compatible, head to the download section of QNAP's own website, enter the model ID of your NAS, and it will tell you whether you can use QUTS. It will give you the option of either QTS or QUTS there. Again, depending on the NAS you pick, it will tell you whether you have that option. But frankly, if you aren't running at least an Intel core, at least a Xeon, or in some cases you can get away with some of the Ryzen series like we saw in the H973AX, Celeron NASs, stuff like that, you're not going to be having it. And particularly you Realtek users, forget it. Next thing to bear in mind, when we're looking at these NASs, at the top right here, you will see on the dashboard here a warning. That warning is because just a little bit before recording, I came back from the Christmas break. I'd already powered down this test NAS, and I noticed one of my drives is not having a good day. Indeed, I found out one of my long-running test drives I've had here on the channel for about 3.5 years is showing signs of issue. I ran it with a smart test and stuff. So I'm not going to replace it for this video, but you are going to see that little warning light up there. Don't worry, that's what that warning is. But that's really it. We're running these two systems. Oh, sorry, last thing before I forget. To squeeze everything in here on screen, to have the OSs side by side, I've had to have the zoom at 80% there to fit everything in. If you are running 100% zoom, this is what you'd see. But again, in order to fit everything on screen, and I could show you the full zoom here if you wanted to, but in order to show everything on the screen, I've reduced the zoom factor there to 80% on these NASs, and that means it allows me to show everything on screen on both of them, but it will look a little bit clustery there, so I do apologize. But again, it was the only way I could show both OSs on screen. But let's crack on, shall we? So first thing to bear in mind, of course, is the fact that the one on the left here, the QTS, is running on an EXT4 file system. Then EXT4 is mad old. It's one of the oldest file systems out there. It has seen revisions in the past, you know, EXT1, 2, etc. ZFS, again, has a tremendous amount of legacy behind it, but both of them are running Linux. Indeed, they're both running the same Linux kernel. If you head over to QTS's own breakdown of QTS and QUTS, they're both running on that 5.10 Linux kernel there. But as you go through their own website, it will highlight some of the features and services available on both of these platforms. But what they really don't do a particularly good job of doing, and again, if QNAP, if you are watching this, it'll be weird if you are, but if you are, I think you could stand to really do a better job of telling people precisely the things that aren't available in one over the other. If you scroll to the bottom, there are some charts that do break down the difference between the two platforms, some of the features and services that are including one or the other, but it is not really feature-led, and there's, I would say, some big gaps in your chart there, given that that's the only chart of differences between them you show, that you could really show off the main differences between them, because at a glance it kind of looks like a lot of these features and services that I'm scrolling through here are only available on the QUTS platform, and that's simply not true. Some of them are only for QUTS, but a lot of them are available on both of them, and I think a lot of users may not realize that either they're running one or the other unnecessarily. So do bear that in mind. But the biggest difference is, of course, that ZFS support, because ZFS brings forward a huge range of not only storage efficiency advantages, but storage feature and utilities that are just not available elsewhere. So in order to really dig into that, we've got to get into the storage manager for both of these systems. Again, we're going to ignore that amber drive there. We do have two different configurations here on screen. We're not drilling down into drives and config. We're really looking about the utility difference between these two platforms. And nothing really says it more than going into the storage and snapshots, because ZFS, zettabyte file system, has one big, I would say, advantage over that of EXT4, and that is the removal of the volume layer. So when you've got all your little storage hard drives, you've got your hard drive, your SSDs, whatever, you put them in a RAID, you know, your RAID configuration, and more on that later on. And then when you've got that big old area of RAID storage, then you can create these little containers on board called, and again, I'm being very caveman, they are the volumes. These volumes are the areas of storage which then from there, you can put media in that, you can run the backups into that, you can do surveillance from it, and you can create multiple of those volumes. In those volumes, you create shared folders, and these shared folders are the targets of the different apps and services, third and third party, externally and internally. So what you have there is a three-layer system: your pool, your volume, your shared folders. In ZFS, it removes the volume layer. You create the pool of your drives, and then on that go all of your shared folders. It removes the volume layer, which improves performance in a number of ways. It simplifies a lot of the RAID creation, a lot of the parity creation, as well as data is being written there in the parity creation, and the result is that typically, with a powerful enough system, ZFS will give you better performance. It also opens up a lot of features that are just simply either not available elsewhere, or you are getting, I hate to use the word, a bastardized version of them. Now, if we go into our storage pool here, double click on the storage pool. Again, I know it's quite small right now, and I know I'm at the bottom of the screen. I debated whether to keep me on screen here, but I thought it would be better for me to portray the point. I might do some mad hand gestures, which I know not everybody loves. But if we double click on the storage pools there, we can see the pool management on both of these. Both of these have got the multiple drives there on screen. There's more drives on that ZFS one, so there will be the slight delay there. And as you can see, we've got that utilization. It's all kind of there. We've set up the QTS NAS more because this was the NAS we were reviewing in the last 2 weeks of 2022, and it's the third day of 2023 today. And again, we can look at the options available on both of them. And there's a lot more config and readjustments available within the pool on the ZFS platform there, But there is one enormous advantage that often gets overlooked in favour of the EXT4 platform, and that is the option to expand the pool. Now this is important, because although both of these systems have an option to expand the pool, and by the way, for the caveman, what that means is you've got, say, 4 hard drives all rated together, and you want to start adding more drives, increasing that. In the EXT4 platform, I'm going to put a circle on with a mouse because I don't know if this is reversed on camera. On the EXT4 QTS5 one, you can, if with the right provisions, you have to make sure you set the storage provisioning up correctly at the beginning, and it will tell you that when you set up the RAID. You can add more drives to that pool. You can even ramp up the RAID accordingly. On the ZFS platform, because it is hardwired, if you try to add more drives, you have to add them as independent pools. So it would be, for example, the equivalent of a RAID 5 or a RAID Z. Then you would have maybe 2 drives in another RAID Z or a RAID 1, and then they would be seen as the overarching storage pool, but they're actually containing multiple RAIDs or cluster RAIDs. So when it comes to expanding your pool, it's a lot easier on the QTS platform with the ZFS there on board. Another advantage of the QTS platform there, and get ready because after this it's all going to go towards ZFS. One of the other storage advantages, at least within the context, it's important, of QTS is the option to use QTier. Now QTier is something we've talked about here on the channel before. QTier is a very unique QNAP service, at least in the world of network attached storage. It's not available at all there. QTier allows you to take a bunch of hard drives, a bunch of SSDs, and merge them into one pool. Now this is not to be kind of misunderstood in the same with caching. Now what the pool does is, in this large storage area that has hard drives and SSDs, predominantly SATA SSDs, I should add. I wish I had a SATA SSD here. Pretend this is SATA. What it does is it combines that big pool of all the available data, creating intelligent parity, and then, as you're using your storage, more frequently accessed data is moved to the SSDs, and the slower access data is moved towards the hard drives, and the result is you will feel a lot more responsive access to data in terms of read as that data is being accessed in the overall pool. The reason this is different from caching is caching takes an area of SSD running parallel to the storage pool, it's not in the pool, and then as data is being more frequently accessed, it creates a copy of that data on the caching, unlike with QTier, where it merges them and actually moves the data around. The same goes with write caching. In write caching, data is written to the SSD and then that is written to the drives. But in an area of QTier, the SSDs are always going to be there for that write caching there, and it will work it out internally. This is something that's not available on the ZFS platform. A lot of that is to do with the architecture of ZFS, and this video is not, I repeat, not designed to be EXT4 versus ZFS, because in this context it's not going to be fair. This video is about comparing QUTS and QTS, because you are now within that kind of framework and structure of QTS. You can't compare EXT4 and ZFS when both of them are within the envelope of QNAP's own software there, because you've already created a box for it to live in. But after this, the advantages are going to slew, storage-wise, over to QUTS. Because QUTS, I mean, strap in. I'm going to have to go to my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. First and foremost, you've got better RAID support. Not only have you got, if we go for a storage pool there, not only have you got support of traditional RAIDs like RAID 1 and RAID 5 and RAID 6, RAID 50, RAID 60, you've got RAID Z. You've also got support of that triple parity configuration there, which means you can have it so that if you've got 10, 12, 16, 20 drives, you can have 3 safety nets of redundancy there. Something you can't get in EXT4 without breaking the logic a little bit of something like RAID 1. You can technically have it, but it's not particularly smooth and certainly not as consistent as triple parity RAID within ZFS. Another thing, if we make our way back into that list of shared folders, is the support of inline compression inline deduplication, and in terms of SSD, inline compaction. Now, what the hell do they mean? Because you hear that a lot, don't you? Well, inline compression is when data is being written to the NAS, and it will then, as data is going to the NAS, it compacts it to save, it compresses it to save space. So it maintains the overall scale and the data itself consistently, running checks, but it takes up less room on those disks in the storage pool. Now, what you can do is actually find out how much data has been saved. You can make your way in, see if I can remember where it is. I think it's there. You can actually see over time how much data is being saved thanks to inline compression, inline deduplication, and it tells you how much data overall. A very advantageous thing, particularly for large-scale business environments running 24/7 with tons of data always being sent through. Now, inline deduplication is a slightly different kettle of fish. When you are sending data from multiple sources to the NAS, you can end up with a storage array that's got the same data coming from multiple sources. Maybe it's shared team folders on a shared drive, maybe it's OSs or updates or stuff like that, but ultimately you can have multiple systems backing up the same data. With deduplication, the system knows when this piece of data is coming from multiple sources. It maintains just one write of that data, but keeps a record of everywhere that it needs to back up or retrieve and send the data back when it's accessed. Inline deduplication means the system is doing that live. It knows when the data is being sent in what is duplicated, whereas deduplication is available on QTS and other NAS platforms. Inline data deduplication is very much a ZFS only thing. It is, again, a bastardized version available in other file systems, but nowhere near to the same efficiency and ability as ZFS. But bear in mind, you will need, again, more memory in order to do that. That last one was inline data compaction. Now, what that is, and this is predominantly associated with SSDs, which have a certain degree of write issue in terms of overall durability. Compaction means it takes advantage, it knows that when it comes to writing to these devices, you have to make sure the data is together as much as possible. When you're writing on disks with these spinning platters, occasionally disks will either on a light phrase internally or via the end user's actioning do something called what's the word I'm looking for? Defragging. And it will defragment. And what that means is when data's been scattered all over the disks because of, deleting data and there's gaps, defragmentation brings all the data together so it's all lovely and close on the disk, which can then lower impact of durability, and it will also mean faster access because all the data is close together. The same principle is there in inline compaction, which is, again, prioritised mainly on SSDs where NAND writes are more of a priority. Again, lower, lighter versions of this are available on the EXT4 platform, but by no means to the same degree, and most certainly nowhere near as natively. Another reason why the ZFS systems require a lot more hardware at the beginning. Something you're going to see a somewhat contradictory point be raised later in the video there. So we've got those improvements in inline compression, compaction, and deduplication. What else have we got to talk about? Well, caching. Caching is handled better on the QuTS platform. Let's bring those storage platforms up. And although I've not enabled the caching on this because I'm using my drives in multiple systems ever since our best of the year content, there is just more options and more abilities. They've both got the equivalent of read-write caching, but you can create cache groups within the ZFS platform there. It allows you to bulk the drives together and also double cache, double write cache there, something you will see advantages in. Vacuum kicking off there in the background. And it's just the cache handling and the cache algorithm is just better on ZFS platforms, and that has been converted over to the ZFS platform QUTS. And I do think those of you that are going in using caching, unless the appeal of QTier and that kind of merged shared media platform that QTier offers is attractive to you. If that's not attractive to you, and caching, particularly write caching, has an appeal to you, and particularly if you're running multiple VMs or a shared drive environment, and therefore that inline stuff is going to be advantageous, then the cache grouping is just going to be more advantageous to you on the QUTS platform overall. Another thing worth touching on is RAID handling entirely, because you remember I mentioned earlier on about the ZFS platform and QUTS not needing the volume tier. Other great advantages to that are to do with the building, recovery, and overall running of a RAID configuration. Now, I'm not able to show it to you because unfortunately I'm running at capacity with all of my available hard drives right now across different NAS systems for future following videos. But if you have followed this channel before, you'll have noticed that if I do, for example, a 4-disk RAID 5 configuration on the EXT4 platform, if I got 4 10 TB drives and wanted to create a RAID 5, this full completion and synchronization, that is to say the readiness of the RAID 5, can take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours to have it ready. Whereas on the ZFS platform, if I took those same 4 10 TB drives and created a RAID 5 there, genuinely it would take around 15 minutes max, and that's because of the lack of need of the volume tier. Overall is because it can basically block the drives together much more intelligently and arguably a little bit more natively there, and that translates further down the line. For example, if I have a drive failure, a RAID recovery, which is when the RAID will go into a degraded state because one of the drives has failed, much like I'm likely going to observe here. I might even keep this drive knackered for another video and monitor it so we can do a RAID recovery. But what will happen is in the QTS platform is when that drive fails, the degraded state will not only run better thanks to the large amount of hardware in ZFS's native reading of the block of the ZFS block, but on top of that, when you introduce the new drive to repair the RAID, a RAID repair will be faster on the QUTS platform as well. And for those of you running businesses where downtime costs real money, not just money, but real money, that will be advantageous there. Another thing, if you have any incident where a drive is either manually or automatically ejected by accident, and by that what I mean is any number of things such as a light power failure in your building, an accidental hooking of a t-shirt on a drive tray, removing the wrong drive in error, any number of a million different ways, both on hardware and a software level, where a drive can be accidentally disconnected and reconnected. In the EXT4 platform on this side, if a drive is disconnected, almost immediately your system will go into a degraded state. And if you introduce that same old drive, it will still need to completely format that drive like a RAID repair. It won't recognize that the drive has arrived from the same array. Whereas in the QUTS platform with ZFS, it has RAID resilvering, which means if the drive is reintroduced within a reasonable period of time, it will recognize that drive is part of the group. It will reintroduce the drive, within a minute, and any small changes in data that have happened over time will then be reintroduced into the drive array from that single drive to keep it updated. So RAID resilvering is a big deal within the system. So faster RAID recovery, faster RAID building, and thanks to that lack of a volume layer as well, just general faster RAID management and handling means that the QUTS platform is going to be the platform for the more robust regular storage user that again needs a system to always be on, always be accessible. But looking at my notes, that's not the only thing we have to talk about. We could talk about snapshots, and again, snapshots is something that is handled ever so slightly better on the QUTS platform. With QUTS, ignore the partial notification there. That's only because I've not run snapshots on all of these folders because they've only just been added. But on the QTS platform, the EXT4 platform, you find that snapshots you can have, I think it's 60 or 65,000, which is still loads, but once you really break it down into multiple storage and file folders with revisions and multiple backups and multiple users, the idea of 60,000 sounds like a lot, but then when you work it out over hours, minutes, days, whatever, it actually all adds up. Whereas on the QUTS platform, it's borderline limitless. Same goes, because of that lack of a volume contingency, the scale of your storage areas is limitless compared to that of EXT4, which does have its limits there, again depending on the provisioning you go for. Also with Snapshots, there is support of SnapSync, where you can remotely connect your snapshots on the QuTS platform in a way that you cannot, aside from traditional Snapshot Vault for the bulk storage of those snapshots there. And that is only available, the SnapSync on the QNAP platform. Now, on the QUTS QNAP platform. Now, I could dig into all of the applications. I could go into the App Center and just start running through as many apps as I could. But the honest answer is there's almost no difference in the bulk of applications between QTS and QUTS. To QNAP's credit, they are running a ZFS system, but with all the usability, applications, user-friendliness and features of most traditional Linux, EXT4 and BTRS platforms. Those of you that are coming from TrueNAS Core, and even those of you that went TrueNAS Core, I hate seagulls, and made the jump over to TrueNAS Scale for the Linux version, you'll know that the range of third-party apps and installing applications is quite limited compared to the likes of Synology or QNAP or whatever. And on their QUTS ZFS platform, all of the apps are there. They're all there. They're all listed through. Even the revisions and the versions are largely identical with minimal differences between each of the platforms. So if we open up HBS, there's a few differences, largely to do with third-party apps, and the revisions are slightly different, as you can see there, between the two of them, but there are minor sub-revision differences. And between the two of them, there isn't really an app that you're not going to find. And the only apps you can't find are either legacy apps or the one that we're going to talk about in a moment. So, for example, PhotoStation isn't available on the QuTS platform, but QMaggie is. They clearly made the shift that QMaggie is the priority platform for photos. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about surveillance. Now, I'm well aware how much detail I went to on this particular point in my QNAP TVS H874 review recently, but I do think it's such an important factor when picking between EXT4 and the ZFS platform from QNAP, not only in terms of usability, but financially, that I think it needs to take up a significant body of this video here. And this is to do with licenses. That's right, you heard me. Now, when you are setting up your QNAP NAS there for the first time, you will find both of them on the EXT4 and ZFS, so QTS and QUTS platform, have surveillance apps. But whereas the EXT4 platform has QVR Pro, the QUTS platform has QVR Elite. And you would be charitably forgiven for thinking Elite is better than Pro, in the same way Enterprise is better than Pro traditionally. But in my opinion, in most other regards, Elite is not better, and if anything, it is a penalised upgrade. And if you're buying a NAS, particularly a QNAP NAS that has the option of QTS or QUTS for surveillance, go straight to QVR Pro and QTS 5, not QUTS, because for all of the disadvantages that you will have in terms of storage compared with the ZFS, if surveillance is your priority, it's an absolute no-brainer. Why is that? Mainly because of this one little detail: camera licenses. On QVR Pro for the QTS platform, you are given 8 camera licenses, and this is on all the QNAP systems that run QVR Pro. If you're running an Intel powered system, an AMD powered system that's x86, so not an ARM processor, you can put on QTS 5 and you can have access to Pro, and you will have 8 camera licenses. Whereas if you're running QuTS, and you're running either the ZFS platform or you're using an ARM-based NAS, all of which arrive with QVR Elite by default, you only get 2 camera licenses. A camera license is what, and I can't bring this too close to the camera, hopefully this is on camera when I'm breaking the place apart. Camera licenses allow you to add individual camera feeds to your surveillance deck. And for those of you that want to run lots of cameras, not just one out the front, one out the back, that will make a tremendous difference to you. What kind of difference? Well, financial. To put it into perspective, on QNAP's own website, there is a link to the license center which allows you to buy licenses. You can go on there and buy camera licenses for all your cameras, and the license cost and other factors make cameras, the cost of those cameras in QVR Pro just way more financially viable. So you've got 8 by default on Pro. To add another camera from QNAP's own store, it's $69 for just one camera, but you can add them in bulks of 4 and 8, and there are other options that allow you to add more and save a little bit more money. And additionally, you can buy camera licenses from third-party e-shops as well, and they often have them on different pricing structures as well. Now, those 8 camera licenses are lifetime, so you've got them forever on that NAS, so they're locked to the NAS, those 8. Additionally, if you buy a new camera license, that camera license is locked to the NAS you put it on. You can't remove it and take it to another NAS. It's locked to that NAS there. So, 1 camera, 4 cameras, 8 cameras, whereas on Elite, not only do you only get 2 to start with, but camera licenses are subscription based. So you can't just go and buy a lifetime license. You have to buy a subscription license. So 1 camera fee, so that's 1 camera, will cost you $1.99 a month, $19.99 for a year, or $49.99 for 3 years. That is a good saving at the 3 year, knocks off $10. But still, you are now in a subscription model where after 3 years, that license is dust. And on top of that, you've got to add that to those individual licenses. And you only got 2 to start with rather than 8. To put that into perspective in my little Word document here that I'll put on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that that $69 lifetime works out over 3 years, $23, and over 6 years, $11.50 per camera. That is based on the 1 camera. If you've got the bulk, it works out $86 for the 4 cameras over 3 years, and $43 over 6 years for those 4 cameras, and again, $259. Whereas at $19 a year, it works out for those 4 camera licenses, yes, it's costing you less over 1 and 3 years, but firstly, you've got that renewal that you've got to put in there because it's subscription based. But worse still, hopefully that is on screen. I apologise if it is not because of my big face in the way. But at the bottom there, the real kicker is the fact that those 6 camera licenses, going by Synology's own Pro model, are a cost of $397 difference in camera licenses. And I know a lot of enterprise level business users are going to go 400 nicker, who cares, I just want the thing to work. Good for you, money bags. But there are a lot of other users out there that will query the cost of those 6 licenses not being rolled in and the subscription model of lifetime licenses versus that of subscription licenses. Now, there is a little bit more to it than that. So, for example, there is the whole idea of unlimited playback, and there is a link that I'll try to put in the description of the main difference between all of the licenses and what they include. But genuinely, the differences are quite minimal to any user that isn't going to be high-end, large-scale enterprise. Now, Elite does have certain advantages. So, for example, it is much less resource intensive. It can run on as little as a gig of memory, whereas QVR Pro needs at least 2 gig, and probably more than that once you use about 4 cameras. QVR Elite, that's why it can run on the ARM-based systems. It's way more resource light. It doesn't require as much behind it to work, and therefore that's why Elite works on the more affordable devices there. What bums me out is on the enterprise tier, that the enterprise ZFS tier, which by its definition of ZFS needs to have a more powerful CPU, needs to have at least 8 to 16 gig of memory. I don't care about efficiency on that platform. I'm using a more powerful system with this great file system. Don't talk to me of efficiency at that point. And putting that behind the camera license subscription there seems really silly to me and quite annoying for a lot of users. And I think if you are going onto a QNAP platform for surveillance, whether it was because of the support of things like KVM with the HDMI output or the larger camera licenses support there, go for the EXT4 or QTS5 version over that of the QUTS ZFS version there, if surveillance is your primary focus. There are some users out there that might argue, what about AI services on the supported surveillance platform? Well, it's the same on both of them, and that's because the AI supported services for facial recognition and more intelligent motion triggering and stuff like that are behind their own individual services and tools, such as Face Tiger and stuff like that. And these are all surveillance applications, if we bring it down closer, with QVR Face Insight and all of the add-on services for other IP, door alarm speakers, that sort of thing. All of this stuff is available on both of them, and the licenses are largely the same. So you can't really use AI supported stuff or other add-on surveillance services to pick one over the other. The real key thing is there, Elite versus Pro. I've thought about doing a dedicated side by side, but I think this is enough to kind of explain that position there between the two of them. Elite is good, and that lack of resource impact will mean that larger camera environments will be better ran. Indeed, if I look at my notes, QVR Pro runs up to, on the powerful enough system, 128 cameras at once, whereas Elite runs up to 192 cameras at once, which again, if you're running an enormous multi-site system with multiple camera system, you're going to take advantage of that. But not a lot of users are, and I think that's a big deciding factor for a lot of people looking at desktop NAS systems in their small, medium business environment, or indeed their home as a prosumer. And in most other regards, there's not really much of a difference between, at least at a glance, between QTS and QUTS. Those core differences are the ones that we've discussed thus far. Looking at my notes, it is the storage differences in the RAID management there, caching improvement, inline data handling. When it comes to the EXT4 platform in QTS, you've got advantages like QTier for the mixed storage media support there. You've got a much easier ability to expand the pool. But it's worth remembering, you then lose out on RAID RAID resilvering, faster RAID building, fast RAID recovery, and just general overall optimized file performance there. But when it comes to surveillance, it's very much the tables have turned with QTS, just giving you more. And personally, QUTS feeling like it's kind of pinching the pennies a little bit for you there. It may be targeting enterprise, and development costs money, long-term R&D, I get it. But for surveillance users, I will always hands down recommend QTS over QUTS. But this has been the differences between QTS5 and QUTS5. Have I missed something that you guys wanted me to expand upon? Is there enough things that I've missed that I should make a follow-up video to this? Because remember, I am just one user testing many environments, and there are millions of these units in the wild running hundreds of thousands of different scenarios. So I'm sure there are setups that you've encountered that I have not. So let me know in the comments if you think I've missed certain things. Remember, we are not strictly talking about EXT4 versus ZFS. We've got to keep it within the context of QTS and QUTS, okay? And that also goes for if you're going to be comparing QTS and QUTS with true NAS. We are not talking about outside of QNAP bubble here, because that is not the decision a lot of new QNAP NAS buyers are facing right now. So again, if I've missed stuff that you think is important, stick it in the comments. If there's enough, we'll make a follow-up video. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you did and you enjoyed it, click like, click subscribe, as we cover this and other storage subjects throughout 2023 as much as possible. If you have any kind of difficulty or something that wasn't asked in this video or my other ones, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It's the blue button on the right hand side of NAS Compares website there, linked to the description, or the free community support forum with me, Eddie, who does more work on that than me, I'll be honest, and other NAS users answering your questions in that forum. Finally, if this video has helped you, and if you were going to buy from Amazon, and you're going to buy a QNAP or any product, and you're going to go to Amazon, use the links in the description to take you there. Because if you use those links, it costs you nothing extra, and anything, and I mean anything you buy, once that link takes you to Amazon, results in a kickback coming to me and Eddie here at NAS Compares, which helps us continue doing what we do. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.